Hello, everyone, and welcome to this training. I'm Martha Turner-Fine. I'm going to be delivering the first part of this training. Towards the end, my colleague Abhishek will be addressing how to figure out how much you owe about fees for certificates of occupancy. So let's get started by talking about the agenda. The occupancy process for BIS jobs involves two steps. The first step is to create a schedule of occupancy, and the second step is to request the certificate of occupancy. And I will be going over both of those in some detail. And at the end of the session, you're going to be able to enter schedule of occupancy requests, update a schedule of occupancy, request a certificate of occupancy, and renew a certificate of occupancy. So some things about the virtual classroom. You may have been to one of our previous sessions, either for this training or for the December rollout, and in which case, thank you. This is going to run the same way. But a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, you will remain muted the entire time because we have a lot of participants. And unfortunately, we're not able to open up the floor to questions verbally. However, there is a question and answer panel on the right side of your screen, and you can enter any questions you have into there. We have a panel of DOB experts that will be looking at your questions. They will answer as many as they can, but if they cannot answer it, it's usually because they need to do some research in order to answer it, and the answers to those questions will be posted on the frequently asked questions when that gets put up. But please do ask your questions. We do want to try to answer as many as we can. There's two kinds of feedback we'll be asking for. There will be at least one knowledge check question as we go that I'll ask you to answer to make sure you understand what's going on. There may be more depending on how this is going. But in addition, we will be sending out a survey. You'll receive a link in your email after this training, not immediately after, possibly a day or two. Please do fill out that survey about what you thought of this training. It really does help us in order to make sure that we're making the training as useful as possible. So let's go straight in. I'm not going to go over a lot of the features of DOB Now BUNLD because it's been around for a while, but I will tell you, I really think it's a great system. And some of the things that make it good are that you can, of course, submit a job filing online. You don't have to go down to the DOB office. You can access real-time job filing information anytime you want. There's a lot greater transparency of the filing process. And one of the things you'll see, particularly as we get to certificates of occupancy, is you can watch as your filing or request moves through the process of approval. Certificates of occupancy go through a lot of steps of approval, but you can watch them as they go, because there is a status bar that will get updated each time your request moves from one step to another. So you'll be able to understand where your request is in the process. And of course, the goal of the whole thing is to have faster processing time. So let's get into it. Before we get into how to do this, I want to talk about what the process is, because this is a bit of a change. Currently, all occupancy requests for jobs filed in BIS are processed in BIS. And that's what you're doing now. The process begins with a Schedule A, and then after the work is done, you can request a temporary or a final certificate of occupancy. As of this release, the entire occupancy process for BIS jobs will be processed in DOB Now BUNLD. It's going to be a one-stop shop for all of your occupancy stuff. And there's two steps. The first step is the Schedule of Occupancy, which is the rename of the Schedule A. And I'll get into a lot more detail about how the Schedule of Occupancy works. But the basic concept to understand is you must have a Schedule of Occupancy in DOB Now BUNLD in order to get a certificate of occupancy. And that applies whether or not you already have a certificate of occupancy. Even if you currently have a temporary certificate of occupancy, if you need to renew it after this rollout, you're going to need to first create the Schedule of Occupancy, and then you'll be able to request renewal of your certificate of occupancy. And the certificate of occupancy request will also be through DOB Now BUNLD. So like I said, there's two steps. The first thing you need to do is to submit your Schedule of Occupancy. And what you're going to do is your Schedule A that was approved in BIS, you're going to need to create a schedule of occupancy using that information in DOB Now Build. And this is a one-time step, but it is required for every BIS new building or Alt-1 job. And there's actually two levels of schedule of occupancy. We'll talk about a bin level schedule of occupancy and a job level schedule of occupancy, also known as BSO and JSO. I've got a lot more about that on coming slides. But once your schedule of occupancy is approved, if you file a post-approval amendment in BIS, and you're still going to file the PAAs in BIS, if you file one in BIS and it affects the Schedule A, you are going to need to update your schedule of occupancy. And once your schedule of occupancy is approved and you've finished your work, you can then request your certificate of occupancy. So I mentioned that there's two levels of schedules of occupancy. There's the bin level schedule of occupancy and the job level schedule of occupancy. And let me explain what they are and the reason that they exist. There is only one bin level schedule of occupancy per bin. And it gets created the first time someone submits a schedule of occupancy request for a building. And the first time someone submits a request, all of the information they put in is going to get transferred over to the bin level schedule of occupancy, the BSO. And anytime someone goes to create a schedule of occupancy request after that, the information from the bin level schedule of occupancy will get automatically added to the schedule of occupancy request for a later job. So in order to make sure we're keeping this straight, we also talk about the job level schedule of occupancy, the JSO. This is what exactly corresponds to the Schedule A. Anytime someone is doing work on a job and creating a schedule of occupancy, what they do is they create a schedule of occupancy for their job. That's the job level schedule of occupancy. The information on that job level schedule of occupancy does not move onto the bin level schedule of occupancy until the request is approved. Once DOB looks at your information and approves the request for a schedule of occupancy, that information will get put into the bin level schedule of occupancy. In addition, only one certificate of occupancy is going to exist per bin. And the certificate of occupancy is going to list every single floor use record where occupancy has been issued by DOB. Now, I'll talk a little bit about what a floor use record is in a minute. But the certificate of occupancy request is going to contain one or more floor use records. You're going to request occupancy on the floors that you did work on. But when the request is approved, what it's going to do is it's actually going to update the bin level certificate of occupancy with the details. And when you go to print your certificate of occupancy, excuse me, which I will talk about later in this presentation, when you go to print your certificate of occupancy, it's going to list not just the floors that you were doing work on, but it's going to list every floor use that DOB granted occupancy on. So when you go to print it, it's going to show everything in the building where DOB has granted occupancy. So this is just a quick visual. It's a simple process. You're going to put in your schedule of occupancy request. What you're going to do is you're going to actually retype the information from your Schedule A into DOB Now Build. DOB plan examiners will then approve that, and the information that you put into your job level schedule of occupancy will update the bin level schedule of occupancy. Then when you're ready, you will request the certificate of occupancy. And DOB will then approve the certificate of occupancy request. And when the certificate of occupancy request is approved, the bin level schedule of occupancy gets updated again. here's the basic concept. If you are doing work, then it's going to make a change to occupancy. So once your certificate of occupancy request is approved, the certificate of occupancy approval then updates the bin level schedule of occupancy to say, instead of this is what is going to be the use, it will say this is what is the use. So let's talk about how this works. So as I've said a couple of times, and as you heard Mark say, the Schedule A is now known as the Schedule of Occupancy. So what you do now is when you have a new building or Alt-1 job, you're going to you submit the PW1A form, the Schedule A. And what that document is supposed to contain is existing and proposed information about each floor or floors and or use of each floor. And in the current process, you are supposed to enter information about every floor in the building. So the Schedule A form is being replaced with the bin level schedule of occupancy, the BSO, in DOB Now BUNLD. The Schedule of Occupancy contains a record of all proposed occupancy data per floor use on the bin. Now, this next bit is really important to understand. Applicants are required to provide all of the existing occupancy details on the bin, even if they do not plan to do work on those floor uses. So you have to enter information for the entire bin if you're the first one who is requesting a schedule of occupancy for the bin. You need to fill out all the information for the bin. And the reason for this is that later on, when someone else comes to do work on that same bin and they're doing an Alt-1 job, when they go to request a certificate of occupancy, it's going to automatically pop up with all of the existing occupancy. And then all they have to do is make their changes. So the first time it's going to be a little bit more work. But the point of this is so that when you do a later job for a bin where you're requesting occupancy, the goal is that you will be able to do it much quicker because all you have to do is fill in what's changing. Because DOB Now will already have the record for what exists. So the Schedule of Occupancy request is going to be reviewed by DOB and approved. We're going to assume the happy path for this purpose. As work gets complete on the building, the proposed occupancy data is updated in the Schedule of Occupancy when the Certificate of Occupancy is issued. And like I said, the Certificate of Occupancy must be requested in DOB Now BUNLD. So I have a quick knowledge check because I want to make sure this is 100% clear. True or false? I must provide occupancy details for all floors in the building, even if I'm not doing work on the floor. Please enter your answer. You've got 45 seconds for each of these, and I'll give you a little bit of time to answer. And then we'll see what people responded. And with that response, I'm going to confirm that you all know it. So I'll give you another 25 seconds or so. All right, the answers should pop up in just a moment. And there they are. And it looks like the vast majority of you got this correct. It is true. You must provide occupancy details for all floors of the building, even if you're not doing work on those floors. And I'm going to show you a shortcut to enter that data quickly. So at any given time, there will be only one of each of these documents for an entire bin. One bin level schedule of occupancy and one certificate of occupancy. The bin level schedule of occupancy contains a record of all existing and/or proposed occupancy data per floor use on the bin. And the certificate of occupancy, which is issued only when work is complete, allows for non-construction use of the space, which you know. So I'll be talking about floor use on the very next slide, but some key points that you need to know. The schedule of occupancy and the certificate of occupancy are broken down by the floor use of a building. A bin will have only one bin level schedule of occupancy with one or more floor uses. This should include all the floors in the building, including cellars and/or basements. Job level schedules of occupancy, JSOs, are created when a subsequent BIS schedule of occupancy request is initiated and saved. So now let's talk about floor use. Here's the basic concept. A single floor in a building can have more than one type of occupancy. So let's look at my sample here, my sample floor chart. This floor of my building has 4 different types of occupancy. It's got offices, it's got storage, it's got educational use, and it has residential use. Each type of occupancy on a floor is a separate floor use record on a schedule of occupancy. So this floor would have 4 records for that floor, 1 for each type of occupancy. And the schedule of occupancy feeds into the certificate of occupancy. So let me give you a more complete example, because there's another point which is really important to understand. Records are organized, of course, by floor level use and occupancy. All spaces of the same occupancy group on one floor, irrespective of their ownership or tenancy, must be combined into a single floor use record. I'm going to say that again. All spaces of the same occupancy group on one floor, irrespective of their ownership or tenancy, must be combined into a single floor use record. So let me give you an example. In my building, there are 3 retail stores on the first floor, and they have different occupancies. One allows 30 people, one allows 20 people, one allows 50 people. Each store is a separate business entity with 2 independent means of egress. All 3 stores must be combined into a single record, and their number of occupants must be added up. In this case, it would be 100. Now, when you enter your data, these are the fields that you'll be entering data into. And we'll go over what it actually looks like in the system, but I want to talk specifically about the field that's in column 5 here. Description of use comments. This is not a required field, but you can use it to add clarification or additional information. However, and this is important to understand, it's advisable to keep the record as generic as possible so you can avoid filing Alt-CO applications. Alt-CO is the new term for Alt-1. So you can avoid filing Alt-CO applications for minor changes in occupancy. So for example, don't list corridors, electrical closets, etc. And this is for future occupancies. We understand that you couldn't control what other people put in the past. This is for future occupancies. So in order to prevent multiple schedule of occupancy requests on the same bin, only one can be in progress at the same time. There's a job level schedule of occupancy for each applicable request on a bin, and a single bin level schedule of occupancy, BSO, for the bin. First time someone puts in a schedule of occupancy request for the bin and it gets approved by DOB, that populates the bin level schedule of occupancy. So when someone comes in to do a later job level schedule of occupancy request, the existing data, what is on the bin level schedule of occupancy, all the records that are on that bin level schedule of occupancy, will get auto-populated into the new job level schedule of occupancy. And you can make whatever changes you need to make, and I'll talk about what changes you can make. And then when the subsequent job level schedule of occupancy is approved, it will update the bin level schedule of occupancy. And then, of course, the bin level schedule of occupancy feeds into the certificate of occupancy after plan review, examiner review, BC, DBC, and QA approval. So what are you going to enter? If you look at the existing Schedule A, there are two columns, one for existing data and one for proposed data. But you don't always fill out both of them. So let me talk about the circumstances in which you would fill out, how you would know what to fill out. The easiest one is new buildings. For new building jobs, you're only going to fill in proposed data because there is no existing data because it's a new building. So proposed data only is for new building jobs. And when you put a schedule of occupancy request in for a new building, it's only going to let you fill in the proposed data. Now, sometimes you're going to enter existing data only. Existing data only, there are two times when you would do that. Probably the most common is, let's say I am doing work on a 5-story building. And I'm only doing work on the first floor and second floor. So for the first floor and second floor, I'm going to enter both existing and proposed data because I'm going to put in, here's what's currently going on and here's what I'm changing. That's existing and proposed. But for floors 3 through 5, this is the first time someone's put a request into DOB Now Build. So I need to enter the information for all of the floors, even if I'm not doing work on those floors. So I need to enter the existing data for the floors 3 to 5. So that's one possibility for existing data only. If a floor use is not yet documented in DOB Now Build, you fill out existing data only. And I'm going to show you how to do that. The second one is less common, but it is still something that may apply. Let's say you have a building you've been doing work on that currently has a TCO. Now, once this goes live, you're going to need to renew that TCO through DOB Now Build. Because there is already a TCO, that means that work is done on those floor uses. So you would enter those floor uses where there is already a TCO as existing data only, because that is what it is currently being used for. But the reason you have to do it is you cannot request a certificate of occupancy, whether it's a brand new one or a renewal. You cannot request a certificate of occupancy from DOB Now Build until there is an approved schedule of occupancy for that building. And then, of course, like I said, existing and proposed is if a space is currently being used for one purpose, but you're changing it to another purpose, you need to enter both existing and proposed. So when you enter data into DOB Now Build, or when data comes into your schedule of occupancy request from the bin level schedule of occupancy, there's 3 statuses. Unverified is the simplest. Unverified simply means that DOB has no formal record of occupancy for this floor. When you enter a new floor use record, it's going to start out in unverified occupancy because DOB hasn't even looked at it yet. But you would also see this if, for example, you have a building that predates the need for a certificate of occupancy. So no one ever documented what's going on that floor. You would still fill in the data, but it would be an unverified status. Verified status means that DOB has granted the floor use or occupancy and that there is no active work in progress on this floor. So verified means that there is an existing, say, TCO or final CO on that floor use, but there's no work currently going on. Active status means that the PW1 plans that triggered this schedule of occupancy have been approved by DOB, and there is work proposed on this floor. So if you have to enter your schedule of occupancy saying, you know, I've got a Schedule A, I'm doing my work, but I need to put the Schedule A into DOB Now BUNLD so that I'm not rushed when I'm requesting the CO. And I'm going to say, this is the existing use, and this is the proposed use. So active means there's work proposed on the floor. So of these three statuses, let's look at what happens when you get floor use records onto your job level schedule of occupancy that come from the bin level schedule of occupancy. This is not going to happen immediately because it's only going to happen once people start entering data into the schedule of occupancy. But remember my building where I'm doing work on floors 1 and 2? Well, let's say my colleague Abhishek gets a later request and he's doing work on floors 4 and 5. When he comes in to request his schedule of occupancy, all of the information I put into my schedule of occupancy that's already approved will show up on his schedule of occupancy. It'll be populated on his job level schedule of occupancy from the bin level schedule of occupancy. So he looks at these 5 floor use records or more, depending on how many uses there are per floor, but a minimum of 5. And what he can do to those floor use records that get auto-populated depends on the status of those floor use records. If the floor use records that are showing up on Abhishek's schedule of occupancy show active, then it's active because I'm doing work there. So Abhishek cannot make any changes because I'm the one that's doing work on those 4 uses. I can make changes if I suddenly find out, oh, this is not being used for storage. They decided to put more of the store there. I can set that up. But Abhishek cannot edit my active records. If a record shows up as unverified, Abhishek can pretty much do anything he wants. He can add a new record, he can delete it, he can modify it, because there's no official DOB record of what's going on. If he adds proposed uses, then once his schedule of occupancy gets approved, those are going to be changed to active. If he deletes it, it's going to be marked as removed by user. So maybe he's been asked to do some demolition on the 5th floor or getting rid of a floor in the building. He can delete that floor use record. It's going to show up as removed by user. Now, if the floor use record that auto-populates on his job level schedule of occupancy shows as verified, he can't change the existing occupancy, but he can add proposed details. So when I put in the information, I put in what's currently going on, and DOB checked, and that is correct, and they approved, and they verified it. Abhishek now comes in, and he's going to make a change, so he can add proposed details. He could even delete that floor use record if he were demolishing that floor, but he can't modify what currently exists. He can only make changes. Now, regardless of which of these 3 statuses the floor use records are on, Abhishek can copy any of those records to make new records, and then he can edit those new records as needed. Now, this may not make sense right away, but the reason I put it in here is because it's important to understand when you actually start requesting schedules of occupancy on buildings that have data in the bin level schedule of occupancy. So get a copy of this presentation. You can get it same page on the DOB Now training page, same place you signed up for this class. And when you put in a schedule of occupancy request and something shows up right away, that means it's from the bin level schedule of occupancy. You can come back to this and say, okay, what can I do with that information? So before I get into how this is done, I want to make sure this is 100% clear. For Alt 1 or new building job filings that originated in BIS prior to this rollout, the occupancy information needs to be manually transferred into DOB Now BUNLD by you, the applicant. BIS is not sending the information. DOB Now BUNLD is not pulling the information. The systems just don't talk in that way, and we can't make them do it. You have to transfer the information. And I'm going to show you the process now. So the process begins on any dashboard within DOB Now BUNLD. There are buttons up at the top, and what you're going to do is you're going to click on plus Schedule of Occupancy for BIS job. Really straightforward, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to enter the BIS job number and document number. Once you enter that, it's going to pop up with the address, so you can check that you typed correctly. Now, there are some restrictions on when you can request a Schedule of Occupancy for a BIS job. In order to request a Schedule of Occupancy for a BIS job, it must be in one of these statuses. I'll give you a chance to look at this. I'm going to take a sip of coffee while I do. And again, this is meant for your reference, so make sure you get a copy of this so you know when you can do this. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to actually get into the BIS Schedule of Occupancy. So before we get into what's in the BIS Schedule of Occupancy, let's try this. So you start by logging in. I kind of skipped that step. We're going to go to DOB Now BUNLD and choose New Building Alteration No Work. And once it loads, we're going to go to plus Schedule of Occupancy for BIS job. And we need to enter our BIS job number and document number. And as it happens, it's popping up here. Normally you'd type the whole thing in, but I'm just as happy not to have to type. When you click next, it pops up with the associated address, so you can check to make sure you put it in right. I look at that and go, yes, that's the address I'm talking about. Let's go. And it takes me into the request. Now let's talk about the request. There's 4 tabs in the request: General Information, Schedule of Occupancy, Documents, and Statements and Signatures. Under General Information, there are 3 sections that get auto-populated with data from BIS. That's the location information, the job details, and the BIS applicant information. That comes from BIS and cannot be edited. There's one other field that I'll show you in a second. Now, who can do this? Well, to start the process, it must be the applicant of record for the BIS job who clicks that button to start the process. You can have an additional contact who's going to enter all the data, but it must be the applicant of record to click that button. And their information is going to be auto-populated into the submitter information. They can choose to enter their mobile number, but that's the only thing that they can even do there. And then they can add an additional contact. There's also a comments field that you can enter if you want. So let's check this out in the live system. Remember I told you there were 4 sections and I would talk about one of them? The first 3 sections I already showed you. There's the location information, the job details, and the BIS applicant information. Now the last field is only going to show up if it's an Alt 1 job. It won't show up for a new building job because the question is this Alt CO, remember an Alt CO is the same as an Alt 1, is this Alt CO job filing related to a new building job filing? If you say yes, it's going to let you know that this value cannot be modified after you click save. If you say yes, you'll be asked to enter your BIS or DOB Now new building job number. If you say no, then there's nothing else you have to enter. And this is just so that it's linked with the new building job. And I scroll down, and under submitter of record, I just see me. Well, in this case, DOB testing 456, because that's who I am. I can enter an additional contact if I want someone else to do the data entry for me. And then there's the comments field, which is optional. I must click save in order to move to the next step. So I'll click save. It'll let me know it's been saved. And two things get added: the schedule of occupancy number and the status bar. So we click save, click OK. The schedule of occupancy request number, let me talk about that for a second. It starts with SO for schedule of occupancy, then it just has a tracking number, and then it has the BIS job and doc number, followed by a code indicating how many times someone has submitted a schedule of occupancy request for this particular BIS job. The review process is pretty straightforward. Pre-file it to the CPE, ACPE review, to the plan examiner review. I know it says CO, but that's just a title. We know that this isn't the certificate of occupancy. We know this is the schedule of occupancy. So then you get into the schedule of occupancy data. Now, one thing to know is in the schedule of occupancy data, the first thing it's going to ask you is the existing building code and the proposed building code, which of course would be the current one. If it's a brand new, if it's an NB job, then it's only going to ask for the proposed building code because there is no existing data. But for most jobs, all the Alt-1s, you'll be entering both existing and proposed. So for this demo, I'm going to focus on the Alt-1 job filings where we're going to enter existing and proposed because that's going to be more common. Now, until you have selected the building code or codes, you will not be able to add a record to the schedule of occupancy. You need to select both of those, and then the plus add button will become active. When you click plus add, you get a pop-up that looks like this. It's the BIS schedule of occupancy form. If you're also filing new building or Alt-CO jobs in DOB Now Build, you'll see a very similar pop-up when you're filling out the schedule of occupancy. The only difference is it won't say BIS schedule of occupancy. It'll say schedule of occupancy. Otherwise, it looks exactly the same. So first thing you got to do is you need to identify the floor where the work is going to be performed. And some of the choices you enter, like floor number, require you to actually enter a floor number. And then you're going to populate your fields. One of the things that you'll notice is that some of the fields depend on other fields. They're called cascading fields. So let me show this to you in the system. So we're going to go to the schedule of occupancy page, and I need to enter the existing building code and the proposed building code. And if you look at the drop down, you'll see that it has all of the options. Well, my building was built in 2015. So it's under the current code. And of course, the proposed code is the current one because it's now that I'm doing the work. Notice, until I made that selection, I can't click on add. But now I've made that selection, I'm going to click on add. So I need to fill out the data for my building. So I was talking about my 5-floor building. There's actually a basement as well. So I find it easiest to work from the bottom and go up. Do it however you want. But I'm going to start at the basement. And under the existing code, the first thing I have to do is select the occupancy classification. Now, what I'm going to do is this basement was being used for storage. And I've been asked to change it because they're building a store down there. So under storage, I must select the occupancy group, S1 or S2. I'll choose the appropriate occupancy group, and then I need to enter the description of use. In order to enter the description of use, either click in the box or click on select. And it's going to have all of the options that are available for description of use. This was a clothing, this is where a clothing store was storing its clothing. So I choose clothing, woolen wearing apparel, not wood. I don't usually wear wood clothes. Now notice that my options are only the ones that apply based on the upper choices. So the point here is that these are cascading. Your choice in each level affects what is available below. So I'm changing this to mercantile, and it is retail sales. So notice I gave me in occupancy group, it gave me the answers based on what I chose in occupancy classification. The occupancy classification gave me answers based on the building code. So it all is cascading. I need to enter the live load. This one is actually on the ground, or underground technically. Maximum number of people. They were only allowing 10 because it was storage, and they now want to allow 100. I need to enter the zoning use group. Now, if there are dwelling or rooming units, I need to enter the number of them here. There aren't, so I can skip it. Notice that this is not a required field. And the last thing I need to do is enter the existing occupancy type. So if it currently has temporary occupancy, if I put that in, it's going to ask me to put in the expiration date for that temporary occupancy. You can even put a date in the past. The system doesn't care. If I selected, for example, final, it won't ask me for an expiration date because there is no expiration date for final occupancy. Now, the last thing here, and this is important, when you go to do your due diligence to determine what the existing occupancy is, we ask that you fill in the job reference number for the job that established that occupancy. And you can put in a job reference number from BIS. You could put in a job reference number from before BIS. You could say NA if there is no job. If there isn't even a certificate of occupancy, you can just say that there was no job that created it. But you can put, this is a free text field. You can put in whatever you need to put in. The existing occupancy type obviously is not applicable for the proposed occupancy. Once I've entered all of this information, I click Add. And the schedule of occupancy has been saved. So we now have a floor use record for the basement. Let me do this again so you can see the process. The more you see it, the easier it's going to be. So on the first floor, we're going to go to floor number and we're going to put 1 in. On the first floor, they were using it for a clothing store. And that clothing store actually ended up moving into the basement. And instead, a bank is opening on the first floor. So we're changing it from mercantile to business and from retail sales to banks. Again, I need to put in the live load, maximum number of people, that's not changing, and the zoning use group. Again, I must enter the existing occupancy type and the job reference number. Now, I'm not changing this just for purposes of saving time. So this is the work that I am doing. The retail sales is moving down to the basement from the first floor, and the first floor is being changed from a store to a bank. The basement is being changed from storage to retail sales. Now, I'm only doing work on these two floors. I'm not doing work on floors 3, 4, and 5. Or 2, 3, 4, and 5, excuse me. I need to be able to count. So let me show you how you enter data for a floor that you are not doing work on. Here's what we're going to do. Again, we're going to click plus add. And again, we're going to select the floor. But this time, I'm going to keep the existing building code because it's still the same existing building code, but I want to gray out the proposed column because I'm not doing work. And the way you gray out the proposed column is by clicking on this drop down for building code and choosing not applicable, and it grays out the entire column. This is how you can enter existing data only. I again need to enter the occupancy classification. We're going to choose business, the occupancy group, there's only one here, and the description of use. This is offices. Now I want you to notice, although you can fill it out if you want, if you are not doing work on a floor, you are not required to enter the live load, the maximum persons permitted, or the zoning use group. You are, however, required to enter the existing occupancy type and the job reference number. And when I enter that, you'll see that I can tell at a glance that this is existing only, not proposed, because there's nothing in the proposed column. Let me go back to my slideshow for a minute. So once you've added all your information, you click add. You'll get the notification and you click OK. And the new Schedule of Occupancy record will show up at the top of the list in unverified status. See, unverified. And if we pop over, they're all unverified because DOB hasn't even looked at them yet. Now, by default, what's going to display in the two columns for existing and proposed is description of use. But you can change what displays there if you would like. If you click on the drop-down triangle next to description of use, you can choose what information you want to display. If I want the occupancy classification, I can choose that. If I want to see the live load, it'll only show me where I've got it. Whatever the information is I want to see, I can choose. Now, as you start getting into large buildings, you're going to get a lot of floor use records, a minimum of 1 per floor. And sometimes there will be more than 1 per floor because there's different occupancies, like my floor use example, which had 4 for that floor. Well, as you start getting lots and lots of records, you may want to be able to sort or filter your data. You can sort by any of these 4 columns by clicking on this drop-down arrow, and it will give you the option sort ascending or sort descending. You can also filter in any of the columns by typing in the box under the column header. So if you only wanted to see what was on floor 37, you could type in 37. It would only show you what's on floor 37. Now there's 3 buttons on each record. There's a copy button, a view edit button, and a delete button. Delete does exactly what it sounds like. It deletes that floor use record. View/edit allows you to open up that pop-up that we saw and possibly make changes. If the floor use is active from someone else's job, I can look at it, but it won't let me make any changes. That's why you see this little lock icon. And then there's duplicate, and you're going to really love duplicate because that's what starts making it easier to enter information for all of the floors you're not doing work on. What you do is you click on the copy button, and that will create a new job level floor use where you specify the floor and the number of duplicates, or you specify the range of floors. It will create 1 duplicate for each floor. And what that will do is it will duplicate all of the information other than the floor number. So let me show that to you. I put in that there are offices on the second floor. In fact, 2 through 5 are all offices. So I had to enter it once, but once I've entered it once, I can click on the copy button and tell it. So I want to go to floor number, and I want to go through from 3 to 5 and create duplicates. And what it's going to do is it's going to create for 1 duplicate each for floors 3, 4, and 5. So all I do is I click create duplicates, and poof, they're there. Now, I can, if I choose, make some changes. So, for example, if I've been asked to change the details, my job has expanded and now I'm doing work on the 5th floor. So instead of not applicable, I need to change it to 2014. And I've been asked to turn this into a cafeteria from offices. So I choose assembly, A2, and then I select cafeteria. Now, once I have data in the proposed column, I now again need to list my live load, my maximum number of people, and my zoning use group. So let me do that. Now, I don't need to change the existing occupancy type because that's still correct. And when I click update, it changes that. So there's 2 ways of getting into a record. You can click on view edit, or you can just double click on the line and it will open up. The last thing I want to talk about is flags. Now, all of the records I put in showed up with a red flag, as you can see. The flag shows up in the column bin Schedule of Occupancy. And what it does is it lets you know whether this floor use record started out on the bin Schedule of Occupancy. If in the bin Schedule of Occupancy, so let me try the sentence again. If someone else set up the bin Schedule of Occupancy, they submitted a Schedule of Occupancy request and it was approved. When I go to start my Schedule of Occupancy, it's going to auto-populate with all of the floor use records that are on the bin Schedule of Occupancy. Excuse me. And every one of them is going to show with a blue flag that indicates that it's from the bin Schedule of Occupancy. Anything that is not currently on the bin Schedule of Occupancy will have a red flag. All of my records have a red flag because I haven't submitted it to DOB yet. Now notice that what you are allowed to do for things that come from the bin Schedule of Occupancy may be restricted. These 2 floors are active because of someone else's job. So the trash can icon doesn't even work. It's not there because I cannot delete those. So a blue flag indicates a record that's on the bin Schedule of Occupancy, and a red flag indicates a record that is not on the bin Schedule of Occupancy. Once you have entered all of your data into the Schedule of Occupancy tab, you can then move forward. No supporting documents are required, but if you want, you can upload some supporting documents. And then in the statements and signatures, only the submitter of the BIS Schedule of Occupancy request is required to attest. And that, remember, is the applicant of record for the BIS job. And then the applicant of record for the BIS job is the only one that is allowed to submit the request. They have to save and then submit. And when you do that, you're going to get an application preview. You may have already seen this for job filings in DOB Now, but let me show this to you. So remember, I have filled out my general information, my schedule of occupancy. I want to save this because I don't want to lose all the work I just did. In documents, I don't need to upload anything. I can if I want, but I'm not required. And then in statements and signatures, I, as the applicant of record for the BIS job and the submitter for this official submitter for this schedule of occupancy request, I click on the checkbox. And then I click Save and Submit. It will ask if I'm sure I want to do it. If I say yes, I get a pop-up where I need to page through all of the pages of the schedule of occupancy request. And when I get to the end, I scroll down and I need to attest again in order to click the File button. I'm not actually going to file this right now. Now, once you have saved a schedule of occupancy request, whether or not you've submitted it, if you go out of it and need to go back in, you're going to do that on this BIS schedule of occupancy dashboard. You get to that by clicking the three lines, also known as the hamburger icon. And then under occupancy, the first option is BIS schedule of occupancy. If you click on that, you will get a list of all of the schedules of occupancy that you're associated with. And this is the one that we were working on. See, it's today's date. And this is the BIS schedule of occupancy dashboard as well. This tells you how to get there in case you forget. And you can see the request status here. Now, ideally, the plan examiner will approve your schedule of occupancy request. However, it sometimes happens that the plan examiner will have objections. If that happens, you'll see it in the status field on that same dashboard. And if you go into the request, you will see a new tab, Objections/Appointments. Objections and appointments are handled the exact same way they're currently handled for DOB NOW BUNLD jobs. If you need details about how that works or how to schedule an appointment, then both the PowerPoint and a video of the class is available. You'll check out the Design Professional training from the December 2020 release. Now, let's say you submit your schedule of occupancy, and then before you can request the certificate of occupancy, something has changed. Let's say you have been asked to add scope to your job. In order to update a schedule of occupancy, what you do is actually you're going to do the exact same process. You're going to create a new BIS schedule of occupancy request for the same job number. And what you'll do is the FLOORUSE records from your original request will get auto-populated onto your new request. And then all you have to do is make the changes as necessary. So that's the schedule of occupancy process. Let's move on to the certificate of occupancy and how that works. So I want to highlight some of the changes that are coming. I'll talk about them in more detail. This is just an overview. Currently, some properties have multiple TCOs and COs, which can make it hard to identify the current CO from the list. In the future, a property will only have one active CO at any point, only one for the building. Currently, the Schedule A is done at the job level, but we're going to have the bin level schedule of occupancy. And the certificate of occupancy is going to be based on that bin level schedule of occupancy. So it'll be one occupancy table and only one certificate of occupancy, not multiples. Currently, changes can alter an entire building's certificate of occupancy, but in the future, changes will only affect the space or floors specified. We're also introducing a more flexible certificate of occupancy structure. Instead of only TCO and CO, we're going to have core and shell, temporary, interim and partial, and final. And we'll talk about what those are. I'm not going to go into huge details, but I'll at least give you a reference to where to look for more information. And part of the purpose of the interim certificate of occupancy is sometimes you have buildings which never get a final certificate of occupancy because there's always work going on. An interim certificate of occupancy is going to be the equivalent of a final certificate of occupancy for a single floor. And an interim certificate of occupancy is issued for the whole floor, and it does not require renewal. The process is also going to be a lot more transparent because you can see as things move through the process, and it's going to link with your filings, your submittals, and with inspections. So currently, you fill out the PW7 paper form and the data gets loaded into BIS. And you'll indicate on the PW7 what type of occupancy you're seeking, and that determines the job or work performed. And you currently need to do the PW6 before doing the PW7. And these are the types of occupancy existing on the PW7. TCO, TCO with change, TCO renewal, and final certificate of occupancy. So let's talk about the new process. All certificate of occupancy requests will now be filed in DOB Now BUNLD for BIS job filings. You're going to specify the type of occupancy being requested based on the business rules per floor use. And you need to use the same BIS job doc number that was used to get the Schedule of Occupancy review request approved by DOB. So whatever BIS job and doc number you used for the Schedule of Occupancy, you need to use that same one for the Certificate of Occupancy. And what you will be asking for depends on what exists on the Schedule of Occupancy, whether you're doing a new or a renewal of a certificate of occupancy. When you go to print the certificate of occupancy, it is in fact going to show all floor uses where DOB has granted occupancy, regardless of the job doc number used to request the occupancy. So you request it for your job, but when you print it, it shows everything that's in the building. And I'll show that to you. So the first thing to know is that we have made some changes to the public portal. On the public portal, you can look up information about any building, including the bin level schedule of occupancy and the certificate of occupancy. You can search by address, by job number, bin or borough, block and lot. So let's do a search. So we're going to put in our house number, our street, and the borough. Oh, need to make sure I'm in the right borough. When I click search, it's going to pop up with something that looks like this. It's going to give you the address, the bin number, and the property profile. And you'll see the more options on the right. And you can, from there, see the bin schedule of occupancy or the bin certificate of occupancy. And if you click on one of them, you'll get a pop-up showing all the floor use records. And from there, you can actually click the print icon to print a copy of the certificate of occupancy. So let me show that to you. There are more options. If I click on certificate of occupancy, I get this pop-up. This is the details, and these are the floor use records, and it gives me information for each of the floor uses. I may need to scroll in this case. And notes how many pages there are. I could click here to print it. I'm not going to right now. In addition, if I scroll down, I can also see the BIS Schedule of Occupancy and the Certificate of Occupancy here. It gives me actually the exact same information. So if I if I click on the View button, I can see general information. I can see the Certificate of Occupancy details. It also shows me documents and payment history. So that's all information that you can get in the public portal. So long as at least one certificate of occupancy has been issued from DOB Now BUNLD. This only shows information from DOB Now BUNLD. It will not show certificates of occupancy that predate the DOB Now BUNLD occupancy. So let's talk about the types of occupancy. There are 5 types. I'm going to go into them in a little bit of detail. Core and shell occupancy is issued for the base building with 0 occupancy. It's usually used for like build outs and stuff. Core and shell occupancy has a time limit and does require renewal. It's usually 90 days, same as the temporary. Core and shell occupancy will be issued for qualifying projects and it requires borough commissioner approval. And in order to get it, all of the floor uses that are approved must pass all required core and shell inspections and meet all other core and shell requirements. Now, one thing that's important to remember is you can request core and shell, but that doesn't guarantee you'll get it. Temporary occupancy is not new. It's exactly the same as it was, and it's for a limited space on one or multiple floors. It is what you should be using when only some uses on a floor have passed all required inspections and met all the other occupancy requirements. Temporary occupancy has a time limit and it does require renewal. Interim occupancy is a brand new occupancy type and is defined in Local Law 2033A. So that's where you would go to look up all the details. Interim occupancy is granted for an entire floor. So if not all uses on a floor have passed all their required inspections and met all the occupancy requirements, you cannot get interim occupancy. You can only get it when all the uses on a floor have passed inspections and met requirements. Interim occupancy does not have a time limit and it does not require renewal. Final occupancy is only going to be issued from DOB Now BUNLD for the entire building at once. Every floor that is included in the application must have passed all inspections required, and the building needs to meet the administrative requirements for issuance of the final CO. The last type of occupancy, and this is last because it's the least common, is specifically for one or more floors of a qualifying pre-1938 building, and it's called partial. In order to get partial occupancy, all uses on the floor or floor that are approved need to pass all inspections required, and the building needs to meet the administrative requirements for issuance of the final CO. Excuse me. Now, if you want more information about the occupancy types, excuse me, let me take a drink. Much better. I've included this table that gives you a little bit more detail about the types of occupancy. I'm not going to go over it now. This is for your use. So again, I recommend that you download this presentation. You can download it from the DOB Now training page. Let's talk now about how you actually request a certificate of occupancy. Any user can initiate a certificate of occupancy request for a job filing. It does not have to be the applicant of record for the BIS job. In order to do it, they're going to click on the plus certificate of occupancy request button. And this can be accessed from any dashboard. And the fee for an initial certificate of occupancy request is $100. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the whole process once in the PowerPoint. Then we'll talk about renewals a little bit, and then we're going to go to the sample, and we're going to go through it there to the live system. So in addition to doing the occupancy, requesting occupancy from a dashboard, you can, once a certificate of occupancy request is saved, you can access it from the certificate of occupancy dashboard, which you access on the left panel using the 3 lines or the hamburger icon, whatever you want to call it. When you press the certificate of occupancy request button, first thing it asks is, what's your job number? You put in your job doc number for BIS and click next. If it is a new building, what you will see is the location information and nothing else, and then you'll click proceed. The reason I say new building is because if there is any existing occupancy, it's not a new certificate of occupancy request. It's going to be a renewal request, which I will show you in a minute. But first, let's go through the process with a new one. Once you get into the request, there are 4 tabs: General Information, Certificate of Occupancy, Documents, and Statements and Signatures. In the General Information tab, you'll see the request information, the location information. Those both are auto-populated from BIS and cannot be edited. Whoever clicked the button to start the certificate of occupancy process, their information is going to show up in the stakeholders, in the requester information under stakeholders. The only thing they can change is they can add a mobile number if they wish. You can add a general contractor, but it's not required. And there will be some applicant information that this is some more details about the person who requests the certificate of occupancy. You'll see job details, also from the job file in BIS and unable to be edited. And then there's a comments field, which is optional. You are required to save the request before you can move to another tab. You will get a certificate of occupancy tracking number and you'll see the status bar. Now remember how I was talking about transparency? This is where it becomes very valuable because there are a lot of steps to approval for a certificate of occupancy, and you can watch as your request goes from pending plan examiner assignment to plan examiner review to pending BC/DBC assignment to BC/DBC review to pending QA admin assignment to QA review, and finally to CO issued. So when you go to the Certificate of Occupancy tab, there's not going to be anything showing up there. You need to click plus add. And what it will do is it will show you all of the records that exist on the Schedule of Occupancy that was submitted for that job. And for each of the 4 uses, you're going to need to specify what occupancy type you are requesting. There is one document that's required. It's called the CO checklist. You'll see when we go into the system that it may not appear, but it is required, and you'll see it once this goes live at the rollout. We're still getting the last details correct. All of the required documentation you need should be combined into one PDF file and uploaded together. But you can upload supporting documents, additional supporting documents if you choose. The requester must attest to the Statement Signatures tab. The general contractor, if there is a general contractor in the General Information tab, they must also sign the request. So that's the process for a new certificate of occupancy. Now let's talk about renewal requests. A renewal request is going to pop up if there is any existing occupancy on the Schedule of Occupancy, whether or not that existing occupancy was done through DOB Now BUNLD. And when you enter a request, a certificate of occupancy request for a job that has existing occupancy, it will show up as a renewal of certificate of occupancy. And you have 2 types that you can choose. You can choose renew without changes or renew with changes. If you select renew without changes, you cannot make any changes to the occupancy, which sounds pretty straightforward, right? But that also means you cannot add any for use records, because that would be a change. And the filing fee for renew without changes is $100. If you choose renew with changes, you can change the occupancy type, and the filing fee is $200. So let's go through this. I'm going to show it to you briefly here, and then we'll go into the live system. Go to plus certificate of occupancy request. You enter your BIS job number and click next. And then you're going to get not only the location information, but it's going to ask you, do you want to renew with changes or renew without changes? So let me show this to you. I'm going to close this and go into here. I'm going to click plus certificate of occupancy request. Now I need to enter my BIS job and doc number. This is not the correct one. This should be the correct one. So I get my location information and my occupancy renewal type. First, I'm going to show you how to renew without changes, and then I will show you how to renew with changes. So if I click renew without changes, click proceed. Notice in general information, we have the request information, we have the location information, we have the job details, none of which I can edit. They're all there for reference. Under stakeholders, my information shows up. And I can choose to enter comments, but I'm not required to. So I want to look at all of this, but I don't actually have to do anything here other than click save. Now when I go to the Certificate of Occupancy tab, remember I told you nothing would show up here. I must click add. And it's going to show me the floors, and I choose which of them I want to request occupancy on. They all currently have a temporary occupancy. I cannot make a change to that. And the reason I cannot make a change to that is because this is a renewal without change. I click select and add. It'll add them all. Remember I told you that the document is not going to show up just yet. It will show up by the time the system goes live. And then statements and signatures, I need to click the checkbox. I would click save. And then I would click submit. It's going to ask if I need to fix things. And one of the things I would need to fix is I need to make the payment. I'm not going to submit this right now. Instead, we're going to go to the dashboard, and we're going to go to the Certificate of Occupancy dashboard. And this one that I started, I'm actually going to delete it because we want to try that again. And we want to try it with changes. So we looked at the General Information tab, we saved, we clicked to add the Certificate of Occupancy and clicked the checkbox next to the floors we wanted to renew, clicked select and add and OK. There was the document information, I attested, and then if I have paid, I can submit. If I have not paid, it will give me an error. Now let's look at what happens when we do a renewal with changes. You put in your Certificate of Occupancy, and first thing you do is you click Renew with Changes. It's then going to ask a second question, and that is this a final Certificate of Occupancy request? And I'm going to say no. I'll show you yes in a second. The Certificate of Occupancy request will open. Nothing changes on the general information screen. So I'm just going to go through quickly. We're going to click Save. Then when we get to the Certificate of Occupancy tab and we click plus add, we can, when we choose the floors, choose to make changes to the occupancy type. So let me show this to you. We're going to choose Renew with Changes. Say this is not a final certificate of occupancy request, and click Proceed. I don't have to do anything, and note that it enters that it's not a final certificate of occupancy request. When I click Save, I can then go to the Certificate of Occupancy tab. I click Plus Add. It shows me all of the floors that I have access to. And each one I click, I can choose the occupancy type I'm requesting. And I can make a change. I'm not going to do that right now. I just wanted to show it to you. So let me delete this again because I'm going to show you what it looks like when we do a final. So if you're doing a renewal with changes that is not final, you make your choices, you upload your document, and you save. And then you can submit. Now let's see what happens when you do click for a final certificate of occupancy request. You're going to go in. Nothing will change in the general information tab. All of this is going to be the same. You save. And then when you get to the certificate of occupancy tab, for the first time, there will be nothing, there will be data showing up here. You will not need to click Plus Add. It will all show up every floor, and the occupancy type request for every one of them will be listed as final, because a final certificate of occupancy is only when you are requesting for the entire building. And then you upload your document and your attestations, make your payment, and then you can submit. So let's look at that. So I'm going to choose Renew with Changes and say, yes, this is a final certificate of occupancy request. And the radio button here says, yes, it is a final certificate of occupancy request. I'm going to click Save. And then when I go to the certificate of occupancy, note that it automatically shows me every single floor use record, and they're all requesting final, and I cannot make any changes here. Once I complete the process, it then goes to DOB for review. Now, both the plan examiner and the BC / DBC have the option of having objections. Ideally, they won't, but if they have objections, you're going to need to resolve the issue before you can proceed. So you may have an objection at this stage at the plan examiner review. You may have an objection at the BC / DBC review. At the QA review, you would only see QA failed if there's an issue. You may be asked to resubmit documents. You may be asked to make changes to the request. You may be asked to provide additional information, but you're going to have to look at whatever it is. Again, the process for handling objections has not changed. It's simply a new area where it shows up. Once a certificate of occupancy has been issued, it can be printed from the certificate of occupancy dashboard. You'll see this printer icon when it says CO issued. If it's not issued, the printer icon will be grayed out. And once you click the print icon, the certificate of occupancy will open in a new tab as a PDF. And here's what it looks like. The first page has information about the building as a whole. And then the second and possibly more pages will have each floor use record showing up. It's going to list the details that you entered into the schedule of occupancy for that floor use. And remember, I told you, even if you're not doing work on all the floor uses, the printed certificate of occupancy will show every floor use that has been granted occupancy. The job reference column is going to show the most recent job that was used to request occupancy. It's going to be the same thing for every floor, whether or not that floor was part of that job. It's still going to show the most recent job reference number every time. Now, if you request a type of occupancy that needs renewal, that would be core and shell or temporary, then the system is automatically going to set the expiration date for that occupancy to 90 days from the date of your request. And this is important. It's 90 days from the date you submitted your request, not from when it gets granted. So if I submitted a certificate of occupancy request today, assuming the system was live, and my certificate of occupancy did not actually get granted until Friday, the 90-day countdown would still be from today, because that's when the countdown starts. Now, the type of occupancy is going to show up in the certificate of occupancy type. So you'll notice here it says core and shell, and the maximum number of people allowed is 0, because core and shell is a 0 occupancy type of certificate of occupancy. Temporary, you will actually see real numbers. Now, these happen to be small numbers because it's the roof and the basement. But the temporary certificate of occupancy will show at numbers of people permitted. And once the final certificate of occupancy is issued, you will see final on every floor use record. And notice that temporary and core and shell had expiration dates. Final has no expiration date. At this point, I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague Abhishek, and he is going to talk to you about fees.
Thank you, Martha. Good morning, everyone. This is Abhishek Namani from DOB Now training team. Today, I will go over certificate of occupancy fees. Based on the occupancy you requested, fee request may vary and fee must be paid before submitting the certificate of occupancy request. Your initial certificate of occupancy request costs $100. When you go renew the certificate of occupancy with changes or without changes, if you renew without changes, it's also $100. If you renew with changes, it's $200. At some point of time, you will request final on the process. The final occupancy is only for the entire building. If they request final, it's no fees. Let's now go into specifics. What does this mean? You first go in and submit its initial. The certificate of occupancy request is $100. Assuming this building is having 5 floors, for each floor something is going on. It's $100 whether they are requesting for 2 spaces or 1 space. Adding new occupancies or seeking to change the existing occupancy will cost $200. If they already submitted occupancy for 2 spaces, that was $100 back before. And if they are renewing by adding some other stuff, because it's a renewal we change, it's $200. Whether you are changing the occupancy or adding new occupancy, it doesn't matter, it's still $200. On January 1st, they request this occupancy temporary. It expires on 3/31/2021. This is March 1st, 2021, and the occupancy didn't expire until June 1st. Because we are renewing, we get 3 months for renewal. Let's say you have a bunch of things going on dated June 1st, which are expiring on August 30, 2021. Because you're renewing an existing occupancy without changes for 3 more months, it's $100. You know what? Let's say you requested final on the occupancy. It's going to apply for every single floor. That's what the final occupancy means. It doesn't have any expiration because final occupancy have no expiration date. And the fee is going to be 0 because the final occupancy have no fees. Thank you very much for attending the training. We really appreciate your time.